No need to confront. He just stood downstairs and drew all the scenes he saw. Lam shook his head and replied, "You can't do it. Once the artist has no inspiration, the painting is just lifeless. I will give you inspiration." Lam widened his eyes and looked at Aunt Nuong. I don't know why she wants to portray this current image. Is there nothing new and lively? A picture of wild ruin like this? Aunt Nuong signaled Lam to follow her. Lam quietly followed. He did not forget to turn back to look at the girl. The same soaring flute sound created choruses that seemed to sow separation and resentment in people's hearts. Aunt Nuong led Lam straight into the house. This was Lam's first time going to the back of this house. Go deeper into the house. Lam only knew that this place was very long and wide. The light was not enough for Lam to observe the surroundings. Everything is blurry, unreal, and unreal in his eyes. Aunt Nuong stopped in front of a room. She searched deeply for the key and carefully opened the door. The room was very large and decorated quite simply. When the light shined from the two windows opened by Aunt Nuong, Lam looked up in shock. He couldn't believe his eyes. All four corners of the wall were hung with paintings and drawings. Aunt Nuong pulled Lam to each painting and explained its theme to him. Her aunt's voice was sweet and different from before. In her voice, Lam heard the sounds trembling with emotion. Have you seen a rustic wooden house surrounded by flowers and fruit? There is a young couple living happily there. The gentle husband takes care of the pots of orchids. Every morning, the wife takes them to the market to sell. Their orchids are loved by many people in the neighborhood. Aunt Nuong turned to look at Lam, her eyes filled with tears. She choked up and said, "The people in the picture are my aunt and Voon Nguyen, her husband." Then Aunt Nuong pointed to another picture, where it was a cozy scene of family life. The husband is reading the newspaper. The wife is sitting by the window embroidering. Next to them is a beautiful baby sleeping soundly in a cradle. Aunt Nuong's voice was quiet as if she were going back in time, living in her peaceful and happy past. Baby Ngok Lan was born in the love and happiness of her aunt and her husband. At that time, her and her husband's life was not rich, but extremely ideal. Each painting clearly depicts each stage in her family. Looking at each painting, Lam can understand the suffering and bitterness that Aunt Nuong felt, starting when Mr. Voon Nguyen became the boss. Brick Kiln. His personality changed completely from the gentle boy who grew flowers in the past. Now, he is a powerful and ambitious boss. His cruelty towards his employees is increasingly revealed. Aunt Nuong advised him many times and cried to him, but to no avail. He became cruel, even to his wife and children. A portrait of Ngoc Lan was carefully given to Lam by Aunt Nuong. She couldn't control her emotions. Her thin shoulders trembled. She said through tears, "At this time, Lan was just 18 years old. I portrayed this picture in my imagination. For the past 20 years, every night he comes back to talk to his aunt. I feel so sorry for him. He died unjustly and suddenly. His soul will never be able to escape." Lam felt his eyes were also a little teary. From the bottom of his heart, he was filled with boundless emotions. In front of him was a poor woman living in a sad past due to the death of her beloved daughter. She did not accept that harsh present. She wants to live in old memories, and she doesn't accept what happened to her. Aunt Nuong's cry sounded heart-wrenching. Lam didn't know how to comfort her aunt. He gently placed his hand on Aunt Nuong's shoulder, gently comforting her. "It's over. Don't be sad anymore. If Ms. Lan at Golden Stream found out, she would be very sad." Aunt Nuong shook her head and turned around, glared at Lam and shouted loudly, "Lan is still alive. She's not dead. Lan! Mom, I'm here." Aunt Nuong has changed and is no longer as gentle as before. Now she was like a completely different person. Her eyes widened wildly as she looked at Lam. Her hands pulled at her hair and she burst into laughter, laughing like crazy. Her aunt's laughter made Lam feel suspicious, as if he had heard it once before. Suddenly, Aunt Nuong reached out and grabbed Lam, then used all her weak strength to scratch at his body, her mouth constantly screaming miserably, "Give me back my child. Please give me back my child." Lan, go back to your mother, child. Don't leave me. Lam did not react. He just let Aunt Nuong hold his hair and scratch him. Then she hugged Lam and caressed him, sobbing. She kept doing this continuously without getting tired, until she was exhausted and fell on Lam's body. The situation was so unexpected. Lam was really panicked. He picked up Aunt Nuong and left the gallery and quickly walked to the living room. Everything around him is still messy. He placed Aunt Nuong on the sofa. Her pale face was pitiful. Immobility enveloped the poor woman, as if death was approaching her. Lam sat quietly and shyly looked at Aunt Nuong. He listened carefully to the rumble from Aunt Nuong's throat, emitting a hard-to-hear sound. "Ngoch Lan, please come to me. Take me with you. My life needs you by my side. It pains me to accept this harsh present. You left me without a last word. I know you are very sad and have lost a lot. But do you understand how a mother feels when she loses a child? You are so unfair to me." "Mom." Hot tears flowed down Aunt Nuong's wrinkled face. Her eyes remained closed. She is gnawing on the tragic pain in her life. As the months passed, she was living in torment of body and soul. The terrifying obsession of Ngoch Lan's death has remained in everyone's mind for many years, causing her life to change. Aunt Nuong's voice sounded like repentance. "Everyone hates and shuns me. I'm a crazy, disgusting woman. I'm like a demon living in isolation and away from the community. But I never want that. I am like everyone else, longing for a life in a happy family. Don't shun me. Don't despise me." Aunt Nuong's breathing was no longer rapid. Her face had turned pink. Her eyes were shaking and slowly opening. She looked around bewilderedly, and when she recognized Lam, she asked, "What's happening to you, Aunt? When did you come from?" Of course, Lam did not want to mention the past event. He did not want to reopen the wound in Aunt Nuong's heart. Peace returned to this house. Aunt Nuong's mood was temporarily normal, but her eyes still looked to a faraway place and were foolish and dull, as if her soul was still somewhere. Dig, dig, dig. The picture has been painted by Lam. There are a few small details left. I'm recoloring them. After the stressful shock, Aunt Nuong was normal and spoke much less than before. Everything around was a mess. Aunt Nuong sat looking at it with absent-minded eyes. In the attic, the lights went out, the window closed, and the girl's figure disappeared. Lam finished the painting. He looked at Aunt Nuong. As if understanding what Lam meant, Aunt Nuong stood up and approached him. Without looking at Lam's picture, she said sadly, "This is my last painting. In human life, the time must come to an end. I do not blame God for being unfair to me. This is the destiny of each person." Lam looked at Aunt Nuong. He hadn't seen her in just a few days, and she had changed so much. Her face had many wrinkles. Her gait was both heavy and tired. Lam spoke softly, as if intentionally loud enough for her aunt to hear. "You also believe in fate, so consider everything as a passing breeze. You are a talented artist. I believe that your paintings will make you a famous person. Now I have to live for myself. This life still has many beautiful things. You must enjoy it." Aunt Nuong shook her head and replied, "I can't forget that sad past, which is partly my fault. Ngoch Lan and Vin Tan love each other, but she doesn't have the courage to protect them. She was too weak to face Vu Nguyin's brutality. Until now, that hatred still follows her. You should not hold all the blame for yourself. The person who caused the sad tragedy was Mr. Nguyen. I think he is also sad and has a guilty conscience over his cruel actions." Aunt Nuong doesn't want to talk about her family. She took the story in another direction. "Don't think I'm a talented artist. During the crisis, she only picked up a pen and painted. She was not trained in any school. I'm really ashamed of you. I've been trained in school, but I'm not as good as you. Real art comes from a person's talent. But creation is just the basic foundation. Don't be too modest with yourself. I think your paintings are very impressive." Lam shrugged and ignored Aunt Nuong's words. He walked closer to the window and looked out. Actually, standing in Aunt Nuong's house, he could not clearly distinguish day or night. Outside, night had already fallen. The sky was dark and quiet. It's time for Lam to go home. He turned back to ask Aunt Nuong for permission, but he was surprised. Aunt Nuong is no longer standing there. His painting also disappeared along with her. Lam walked back to the easel. He saw a white sheet of paper on which Aunt Nuong used his paintbrush to write a few words. "Thank you very much, Lam. I have a gift to repay you. Please accept this as my kindness. Goodbye. Sorry, I can't see you off." Aunt Tu Nuong Lam looked over to the table where there was a black velvet box. He nervously opened it to see. There was a beautiful blue jade bracelet in there. He didn't know if he should accept it or not. Because I understand that the value of this bracelet is much greater than the picture I drew for Aunt Nuong, Lam finally decided to take Aunt Nuong's gift, packed all his belongings, and quickly left Aunt Nuong's house. Outside, the space was quiet. Not a single person passed by. Lam raised his hand to look at his watch. It was only 8 o'clock at night, but he thought it was 12 o'clock at night. Alone in the darkness, Lam silently took small steps, thinking endlessly about the time in Aunt Nuong's life. Not long after being filled with happiness, it turned to threatening unhappiness. Does human life only exist to nibble on bitter things? Lam sympathizes and understands Aunt Nuong's loss. Although he saw many of her aunt's myths, and he could not conclude the truth about whether the girl playing the flute in her house was a real person or a ghost, he ignored everyone's rumors in this town about his aunt. He had to stop them from destroying her house. While Lan was lost in thought, when he arrived home, Mr. Nam was waiting for him outside the gate. As soon as he saw him, Mr. Nam asked, "Where did you just get back from?" Lam was startled and looked at Mr. Nam for a long time before answering, "I'm going to paint." Mr. Nam interrupted Lam's words. "You lied. Did you go to the puzzle house? Have you met her and her mother?" Lam looked at Mr. Nam in surprise, his eyes examining his every move, causing Mr. Nam to shy away in confusion. Lam remained silent and did not answer Mr. Nam's question. He walked past Mr. Nam and went straight into the house. He knew that behind him, the man quietly followed as he entered the house. "Go to the living room." Lam stood there and waited for Mr. Nam. "Just saw you." Lam asked, "What do you know about that haunted house? It seems like he still has many things he wants to hide from his children." Mr. Nam sighed and replied. This time Lam saw tears rolling down his cheeks. "I don't want to hide anything from you, but in this matter I have buried it for a long time. Well, this time you are the first and last person to dig up that past." Having finished speaking, Mr. Nam covered his face and cried. His crying made Lam even more confused. "I am Vintan's father. I... Mr. Nam's voice trembled with every word he said. Lam looked at Mr. Nam in shock. He was so surprised by this truth. In front of him, Mr. Nam's old body kept wobbling as if he could not balance. He cried soundly like he had never cried before. Lam could only silently look at him. "I don't want to ruin this atmosphere." When Mr. Nam's emotions subsided, he looked at Lam and said, "Vintan is my second son. He is so honest and gentle. When I knew he was in love with Ms. Lan, I tried my best to stop him. But it's hopeless. Its love is too strong. That's why she had to suffer such a tragic death." After her death, Lan was so sad that she locked herself in her room all day. "As for my family, Mr. Nguyen sent someone to burn our house and drive us out of town. My wife was so crazy that she couldn't bear Vintan's suffering. She bit her tongue and committed suicide." Mr. Nam remained silent and did not continue, as if he wanted to return to face that sad past. Lam walked closer to Mr. Nam and sat down next to him, his hand placed on his shoulder, comforting him. "I don't know how to express my family's loss, but what's past is over. Let it go. Don't stir up more grief. I don't want to mention this sadness, but that woman wanted to cause trouble in this town. Everything he saw was all her doing. Lam looked unconvinced and asked Mr. Nam, "Don't you believe there are unjust souls? I saw with my own eyes the girl playing the flute. Wasn't it Ms. Lan? She's so talkative. There's no unjust soul of Ms. Lan. If there was, then my Vintam's death would be even more unjust than hers. Why don't I see anything? It seems like you don't have much sympathy for Aunt Nuong. In this story, she is just like him." Mr. Nam grumpily replied, "I don't need to know. I hate everyone in that family. Even your grandchildren?" Mr. Nam looked at Lam in shock. His words, made him shake. He lost his voice and asked Lam, "What do you know about that girl? Have you met her?" Lam shook his head. "I haven't met you yet, but are you sure your grandchild is a girl? I met him once at Miss Lan's funeral, but Mr. Nguyen's family did not let me in. They beat and chased me away. After that time, I had no news about it at all. Everyone in town said that Mr. Nguyen had given it to the orphanage." Lam was startled. His intuition told him something about this story. He thought of MoccHD and the mysterious appearance of the girl he once met. Mr. Nam asked, interrupting Lam's thoughts, "When you went to that house, did you see anything strange? There are many strange things that you don't know." Lam looked at Mr. Nam mysteriously. Mr. Nguyen left home a long time ago. Their family went bankrupt after Ms. Lan's death. Now, there is only Aunt Nuong left in that house, who is living in madness because she misses Miss Lan. Mr. Nam did not say anything. He just silently listened to Lam say, "The whole town is condemning Aunt Nuong." They gathered together and agreed to destroy the house where Aunt Nuong was staying. They think it's a haunted house that needs to be destroyed. Mr. Nam looked at Lam bewildered, as if he could not believe that he had heard Lam's words. He asked, "Is that true? Does the whole town want to destroy that house? It's impossible to do that. Although Mr. Nguyen is at fault with everyone, we should not treat them too cruelly." Lam nodded. He did not expect Mr. Nam to change his mind about revenge. Perhaps when he heard him mention his grandson. "I think he has lived here for a long time and he is familiar with everyone in this town. You should advise them. It's not as simple as you think. She created evil tricks to harm people. Now everyone is punishing her. Partly due to curious people causing trouble, Mr. Nam doesn't want to hear about this anymore." He stood up and quietly left the room, leaving Lam bewildered to follow. His sudden change made Lam feel confused and his mind dizzy. The grievances in each person's family are getting more and more complicated. It seems like he sees revenge deep in their minds. Lam also returned to his room. He laid himself down on the bed after a tiring day. Suddenly, Lam's eyes stopped at the painting Sunset that he drew when he first met MoccHD. For some reason, he had a hunch that there was some kind of relationship between MoccHD and Ms. Ngoc Lan. MoccHD's eyes and smile were similar to Ms. Lan. Could it be that they were? He tried to close his eyes as if he didn't want to continue thinking. His head was so heavy and painful at this moment. His eyes felt dizzy. The natural lethargy made Lam's whole body tired. In the middle of the night, Lam was woken up by Mr. Nam's call. Lam didn't know what was going on. He sat up while sleepiness was still pulling heavily on his eyelids. Mr. Nam's voice startled Lam awake. "The girl from yesterday is waiting for you outside the gate." Lam quickly ran down to him, ignoring Mr. Nam's Ngoc stood waiting for Lam right at the gate. As soon as she saw him, she panicked and shouted, "Mr. Lam, my grandmother wants to see you one last time. Hurry up and follow me, Mr. Lam." Without waiting for Lam to speak, MoccHD grabbed his hand and pulled him away. They both ran into the dark night at high speed. Aunt Nuong's house appeared in bright light. All the lights were lit, completely different from the gloom before. MoccHD ran and said to Lam, "Are you surprised to know that Aunt Nuong is my grandmother? Then I will tell you about my story." Lam nodded at Ni's words, while the two ran to Aunt Nuong's room. The room is lit with hundreds of tree lights. She lay on a large bed covered with red velvet sheets, her eyes closed. When she heard Lam and Ni's footsteps, her eyes moved and slowly opened to look at everyone. Lam couldn't believe her eyes anymore. After only half a day, Aunt Nuong had lost so much weight. Aunt Nuong weakly waved Lam and Ni to come closer. Her voice was heavy and hard to hear. Lam, I don't have much longer to live. The angel of death is on his way here to take me away. I know tomorrow morning, everyone in this town will come here and destroy this house. Aunt Nuong cringed. Her breathing quickened. Lam panicked and ran to her aunt and said softly, "Please stay calm and recuperate. No one can come in here and destroy this house." MoccHD interjected, "Grandma, I've already called Grandma. Dad, she'll be here soon." Lam looked at MoccHD, as if understanding Lam's look. MoccHD explained, "Grandma Ba is my grandmother's younger brother. When I was little, I lived with my grandmother. Does your grandmother live nearby?" Ba's grandmother's house is very far away, in Lamdong, Dalat. Then, MoccHD whispered softly into Lam's ear, "Grandma Ba died 2 years ago. I hid it from her and didn't tell anyone." Having finished speaking, MoccHD walked closer to Aunt Nuong. She bent down and whispered something in Aunt Nuong's ear. Lam saw Aunt Nuong's nod. He didn't understand what happened between them when MoccHD stood up, walked closer to Lam and whispered, "I have to go out. Please stay with my grandmother. It seems like Grandma has something to say to you." MoccHD's figure quickly disappeared behind the door. Lam walked to Aunt Nuong's side. He sat drinking next to his aunt. Aunt Nuong's voice became increasingly faint or lost in space. "Aunt, see me as MoccHD. Poor girl. She is bound by my oath. She must live in her mother's soul. All the stories about unjust ghosts. The girl sitting and playing the flute. The sound of the flute calling the soul. Were all woven by the aunt. The one who was punished was the aunt." Saying that, Aunt Nuong tried to swallow the tears flowing down her thin lips. Lam reached out and grabbed her pale and weak aunt's desk, as if wanting to share the loneliness and pain that had lasted for so many years. "You torture my conscience like that. Everything happens for a reason. There is no one in this world who doesn't make a mistake at some point. But your mistake is too big. Everyone is hating you. You are the one who brought trouble to them." Lam used his handkerchief to dab the tears on the woman's cheeks. His intimate remarks made Aunt Nuong feel sad. She forced a smile and continued, "It was unexpected that at the end of my life, I would meet you, the person who shared and comforted me, sympathized with my mistakes. God is still not unfair to me." Aunt Nuong's voice gradually weakened and faded in space. Her aunt's eyes closed as tears streamed down her cheeks. Her aunt's hand was still holding Lam's hand tightly. The heat from her aunt's hand gradually turned cold, until Lam realized that her hand was not holding Aunt Nuong's hand tightly. When MoccHD stood next to Lam too, she covered her face with her hands and sobbed, "My grandmother passed away peacefully. I feel so sorry for her." Lam did not think that a person's death would come so quickly. He could still hear Aunt Nuong's voice whispering in his ear. But now she lay quietly and motionless. Human life is so short, so existence or non-existence is just meaningless. The room was silent in mourning and death. The wind from outside rushed into the 2 windows. The wind blew out hundreds of candles at the same time. The light in the room went out just like a person's life just went out. MoccHD stood next to Lam, both in a worried mood. In the dark and gloomy space, I could only hear the sound of the wind blowing on the window frame, the chilling sound of the wind whistling through the crack in the door, and then a source of ice-cold air blew into the room. It was this cold air that made Lam remember the day he met her. MoccHD trembled and hugged Lam. Her voice was soft. "Has the angel of death arrived to take my grandmother away?" Before MoccHD could finish her sentence, a green light soared into the room. The sparkling light was circular like a chicken egg. That light flew around where Aunt Nuong was lying. Outside, thunder echoed loudly. The rain suddenly came from somewhere. The rain became heavier and heavier. The sound of the night rain rushing on the leaves was like a sad song sending people away. The green light was still flying around Aunt Nuong. The light brought a cold breath into the room. Lam felt the cold entering his body, invading his whole body, making it tremble. He clenched his teeth to keep from making a sound. While MoccHD couldn't control herself, she let out a moan. Her breathing became more and more rapid as if she couldn't bear it anymore. She shouted, "Let's run out of here. Don't know what's going on." Her scream affected that green light, and suddenly, that light soared into MoccHD's body. There was some boundless force that pushed MoccHD away from Lam, causing both of them to fly out and fall to the ground. Lam tried to regain his balance and sat up, but MoccHD was standing tall in front of Lam, her hair tangled in the wind, and Ni's eyes sparkling the same color as that ghostly light. Ni's voice rang out. The sound hurt every cell in Lam's body. "Don't be afraid. I won't harm you. You are a good man. You understand my story." Gradually regaining his composure, Lam was not afraid of MoccHD's unusual words. He remembered this voice he had heard in the dream. Lam shouted with all his strength, "Don't hurt MoccHD. Let her go immediately. How can I harm MoccHD? It's a part of my flesh and blood. I think the story is over. Your injustice was caused by your relatives. Forget everything and come back and become a different person. I want to thank you for treating my family well. I never think about resentment. I have been incarnated as a light to escape a painful human life a long time ago." Lam was worried about MoccHD. He didn't care about the words, but mainly saw MoccHD soften when that light escaped from her. Lam ran to hug Ni. That light circled around the room and flew through the window, disappearing into the night. The light in the room had returned to its original position. Hundreds of candles were suddenly relit in a very natural way, although clearly no one did it. The rain outside had stopped. The cold air in the room had disappeared. All scenes returned to normal as before. MoccHD has woken up. She opened her eyes and looked at Lam bewilderedly and asked, "What happened?" It seems Ni frowned, trying to remember what happened, but Lam reassured her even though it was a lie. "It's nothing. Just now, the heavy rain and wind blew out all the candles, so I just lit them again." MoccHD blushed when she saw herself lying completely in Lam's arms. Ni gently pushed Lam away and shyly said, "You're so careless." Lam didn't care about MoccHD's confusion. He walked closer to Aunt Nuong and gently stroked her face one last time. MoccHD also followed him. She prayed, "Grandma, I will do as you say. Please rest assured and close your eyes." MoccHD reached out and gently squeezed Lam's arm as a sign to follow her. They both left Aunt Nuong's room. "Just let your grandmother lie here quietly. Tomorrow morning someone will bring the coffin. I have these things to show you." Lam followed MoccHD. This time MoccHD took him to the attic that he really wanted to go up to, but was stopped by Aunt Nuong. The door was opened wide. The light inside was just enough for Lam to see each item clearly. On the smooth black wooden dressing table, there was a low-light purple-white stone. MoccHD walked over, picked it up, and gave it to Lam. This is a battery-powered artificial stone. Inside is a tiny purple light. MoccHD looked at Lam and smiled. After a while, she continued asking, "Do you remember when you met him on my mother's grave? I was also present at that time." Lam suddenly remembered. The first time he met MoccHD's grave, there was that purple light and a white shadow with a mournful sound. It turned out that it was not a ghost, but MoccHD. Lam looked at MoccHD in surprise and asked, "But I don't understand. Why on rainy nights do I hear that mournful sound of the flute? The sound of the flute seems to call people's souls. Why do you do that? Do you remember that my mother hanged herself one rainy night? So, my grandmother wants everyone in this town to remember my mother, to remember her painful flute sound." Lam walked to the chair next to the dressing table and sat down. He listened to MoccHD continue. "When my mother passed away, I had just turned 3 months old, and my grandfather decided to put me in an orphanage. Maybe my grandmother didn't like my father, so she hated me. Only my grandmother is the one who loves me. She secretly sent me to Grandma Ba, my maternal younger brother in Lamdong Dalat, to raise me. When I was 20 years old, my grandmother and father died. Before my grandmother died, my father told me everything and told me to come here and play the role of my mother. That is, a Ngochlan in my grandmother's eyes. And my grandmother made me swear that no matter how strange a request my biological mother gave me, I would have to do it. After all, it was my biological mother who protected me, so I can't go against your wishes. Having said this, Ngochni was silent. She walked to the window and opened the door wider. Outside, the darkness had shrunk to make way for the dawn light. The scenery in the foggy morning was lively and cool. A fresh breeze blowing into the room erased all the sadness. Lam looked around the room. He saw on the bookshelf a human head. With a white square face, the face had only 2 blood-red eyes. Lam chuckled inwardly. He remembered meeting it in Chithong's living room. Ngochni turned to see Lam staring intently at that terrifying skull. She blurted out and asked, "That skull was made by myself. Does it make any impression on you?" At first I felt a bit scared, but after a long look, I liked it. Lam replied with a shrug. "When I went into the house and threatened you and your friends, I was very worried. But my grandmother kept reassuring me, so I didn't worry. But your friend is too fierce." He threw something at my grandmother's head and it bled profusely. Lam laughed out loud when remembering this story, and Ngochni tried to remember the times when she wore loose ancient shirts and wandered alone on quiet streets at night. In the stormy wind and rain, she had to stand quietly at the window hoping someone would see her. Her purpose is to transform into an unjust soul to collect debts from the unjust soul. Or when she plays the mournful and sad flute sound in the dark night, the listeners think that the flute sound summons the ghost of the devil, inviting each other to go home and annoy everyone. At times like that, alone at night, she was afraid of encountering a ghost. She didn't know how she should behave. Lam spoke up, interrupting Ngochni's thoughts. "I pretended to be a ghost to scare people. So, do you believe that in this world there are unjust souls that have not yet been transcended and are hanging around us? I have never seen nor met ghosts, but in my opinion, there is another world behind me." Lam did not say anything in response. To Ngochni's words, he also secretly thought that there was something that he could not explain. Ngochni pulled out an envelope from the closet, then handed it to Lam and said, "My grandmother sent you a letter that she wrote the other day, but she told me that she would give it to you when she passed away." There were voices of many people downstairs. Ngochni looked through the window and recognized the people at the funeral company. She walked out the door and went downstairs. When she left the room, she didn't forget to turn back to advise Lam. "I went down first. They brought the coffin to my grandmother. You just stay here and read the letter and then come down later." Ngochni's footsteps were clearly heard on the stairs. Lam was left alone in the room. He slowly opened Aunt Nuong's envelope to see the light pink letter with beautiful handwriting, proving that Aunt Nuong was a rare and talented person. "Child Lam, when you read these words, I will no longer be in this world." She knew death was near her, and I understand clearly when it will come. I'm really sorry for the days you were in this town. The crazy actions of my aunt and Ngochni have made me crazy, making everyone's life not peaceful. This is my mistake. Please forgive me. When people have entered the eternal world, all their repentance is very sincere to repent once, to pass away peacefully. I know you are a talented artist and you will soon organize an exhibition of your own paintings. Therefore, the 2 paintings, Happy Heaven, are my spiritual gift to you. I hope you will accept them. People will not know you and will never know you. You are the only one. Only one knows. As for Ngochni, I regretted forcing her to swear to me alone. But since she met you, I understood that such a promise was too selfish and foolish. I will take back that oath. I will bear all the punishments. The Last thing I want to tell you is that I know Mr. Nam is MoccHD's grandfather. Please help me make them recognize my grandfather and nephew. Once again, please apologize to everyone. Unhappy woman, Tua Nuong. Lam read the letter left by Aunt Nuong over and over again. He felt more sorry for Aunt Nuong than condemning her crazy actions. I think soon everyone will sympathize with this unfortunate woman. It seemed like everyone downstairs was preparing to put Aunt Nuong in the coffin. Lam stood up and suddenly he saw a fire flickering by the window. Lam looked and thought thoughtfully. Outside, in the yard, MoccHD is burning Aunt Nuong's mementos, including paintings that she is the author of. Lam knows that MoccHD is carrying out Aunt Nuong's last words. He thought to himself, when people die, they also take souvenirs with them. There was cheering outside the gate. Lam guessed that everyone in town was coming to Aunt Nuong's house to destroy it. Lam quickly walked downstairs. He stood in the middle of the yard with his arms outstretched. He shouted, his voice resounding, "Let the dead have a peaceful sleep. Everything will be resolved. Everyone should not be selfish. Create for themselves a love of kindness and generosity." There was the sound of someone rushing from a crowded place. Lam recognized the voice of Min, the son of the woman selling the shop at the market. He's been captured by the evil old woman. He's not human anymore. He's a ghost. At the same time, many voices responded, "Ignore him. Let's go inside the house and destroy the furniture to bring that old woman out here for punishment. Let's go straight in. Whoever stops him will be beaten to death without forgiveness." From inside MoccHD's house, she walked out leisurely. She said loudly, "On the contrary, no one has the right to enter this house. We are living in a fair society, not in a society that tramples on each other." MoccHD's voice made everyone quiet. Her sudden appearance made many surprised eyes. They don't know who she is at all, because as far as they know, only Aunt Nuong lives here in this house. Lam looked at everyone. "I understand everyone's psychology right now." He spoke up. "I think everyone should leave their grandparents alone. This family is in mourning, can't you see?" The woman everyone cursed was lying peacefully in the coffin, an unfortunate and pitiful woman. Aunt Nuong did not harm everyone, but 9 people tried to harm her. Who among you secretly threw stones into this house? Who else despised seeing Aunt Nuong? Everyone condemns Aunt Nuong, but please examine your own conscience. Aunt Nuong's weak resistance only scared everyone that there would be revenge from the unjust souls in her house. She made up a story like that, just wanted everyone to stay away from Aunt Nuong and leave her alone. Each of Lam's words penetrated deeply into everyone. They were no longer as aggressive as before. Some people withdrew and quietly left. There were a few people left. It seemed they didn't fully understand Lam's words. An older man looked at Lam and said softly,